Well, hello and welcome to Console Room 2026. This is the Emissaries of the Eocene panel. We're going to be talking about Silurians and Sea Devils today. I am Michael Zecca. I'm going to be one of your two panelists on this today, and pass it to Gabby and let her introduce herself.
Hey, I'm Gabriela Santiago. I'm your other panelist for today. I'm a writer of short fiction with work in Lightspeed, Strange Horizons, Nightmare, etc., and a big Doctor Who fan for going on almost 2 decades now.
And mine is at about 45 years come May. I've been watching this show for a good long time, and I do have a passion for science. I started off with training in astrophysics. I have a passion for paleontology as well. Spent some time in the summer of '92 sick and reading up on paleontology in depth. I'll have a few things to contribute science-wise as the panel goes. All right. Well, so we're talking about our favorite Earth reptiles today. So I suppose we should start in 1970 with the introduction of the Silurians in John Pertwee's first season. This was a script by Malcolm Hulke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Third Doctor is one of my favorite eras, and I know it's one of, or if not the favorite era for you as well, Michael.
Yeah.
And this episode is just brilliantly written, I think. They're still figuring out what the Third Doctor is going to be and what a Third Doctor episode is going to look like, but it really does just a wonderful job of treating the central ethical question of the Silurians, which will be repeated from episode to episode as the year comes along, but just really exploring the nuance of it. There are so many interesting themes in it, themes of colonization, themes of anxiety around nuclear energy, around the economy. During my most recent rewatch, I was just really struck by the themes of communication and hierarchy, both with the humans and the Silurians, and the way it breaks down. The Third Doctor is still very new to UNIT and the Brigadier and Liz, and the trust is not quite there yet. And it's just the way they slowly ratchet the tension with each escalation and setback is really well done.
I will say this was my favorite story of season 7. I know everyone likes Inferno more, but Silurians was the one for me. Love the idea of a species descended from dinosaurs that's intelligent. It's a place where Earth history might have gone had we not had Adric smash into the Earth with a spacecraft and kill them off. And you mentioned a lot of the nice little details. One thing I really liked here is I think it gets back to the Doctor's alienness a bit, as we did back in the early Hartnell era, where he's not necessarily siding with the humans in this story. He understands the Silurians' perspective. He respects their place in Earth's history, and he's trying to negotiate a peace between the two so that they can both function in this environment. He has feelings for both. And I really respect that. And it does cause some tension with the unit folks and with the Brigadier in particular. But, he really is his own self here, and not just a tool for unit. And yeah, we get to see, even though we only see a few specific Silurians in this story, we do get to see that they have a culture and a civilization. They have scientists, they have leaders, they have more militant members. They have a young, brash Silurian that's got a more militant streak to him. They've got older, more conservative Silurians that want to go slow with this. You mentioned nuclear anxiety, but there's also a bit in here involving a willingness to use biological warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the scientist in me really loves the third eye.
Mm-hmm.
So, at various points in the development of life on Earth, we eventually settled on 5 fingers as kind of being a basis. And obviously, not every creature has 5, some have fewer, but it starts from that basic 5 in the genetic evolution there and then works its way down to what's actually necessary. There were creatures early on that experimented with more and less and did more limbs and less limbs and more eyes and less eyes. And so this idea of a third functional eye was pretty cool. I love that they did the camera work to show what the vision would look like with three eyes rather than two.
Mhm.
It was definitely a functional eye. Also, getting into the mystical, spiritual side of Doctor Who was getting into the whole idea of that third eye having some psychic capabilities, sonic capabilities. Um, and that was pretty cool. I think that when the Silurians returned in Warriors of the Deep later on, that JNT and the staff they had there sort of misunderstood what that third eye was for. And it would just light up when they talked, kind of like the little Dalek ear stalks. And that bugged me in 1984 when Warriors of the Deep aired. But yeah, the Silurians were really interesting, well developed species. Now, obviously, they were a rubber mask. They didn't have the advances in mask design that we got later with the Draconians, and they might have benefited from that. But I think they did a pretty good job with what they had for 1970.
Yeah, I mean the rubber masks are going to look silly, but hey, it's Doctor Who. You got to
Yeah,
use your imagination. And I really appreciate they did a lot to build up the tension before they showed the rubber mask. There's a lot of use of silhouettes, a lot of use of POV shots, like you said, with that third eye. And I loved doing my most recent rewatch of the Silurian episodes for this panel to see them bring that back in Doctor Who and the Sea Devils. And then again in Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, we have these little hints with the use of the silhouette, with the use of that POV shot that is either separated into that third eye or in New Who, a more of a honeycomb effect where you're like, this seems slightly familiar. And I will say to your point about the biological warfare, yes, that anxiety and that definitely for me hits different post 2020
yeah,
when you see these people refusing the inoculations and everyone is so bad at quarantining and you're like, yes, before this I might have been like, oh, this is like a story device, but no, people are just that bad at quarantining and contact tracing. Why don't they isolate the conductor at the station?
mm-hmm.
uh, yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And of course, this was a popular, successful story in 1970, and based on that popularity, there was a desire to bring them back a few years later. And they went in a different direction with it with the Sea Devils. We said, okay, they have a cousin species, another intelligent reptile species that were amphibious, lived in the oceans, and hence the Sea Devils were born. And um, I really love that turtle head mask they did for the Sea Devils. I know they weren't able to show a lot of emotion, but they just looked good to me.
Yeah, I mean, they looked good enough that they brought back that look almost unchanged for Legend of the Sea Devils. Like they can blink now,
Yeah.
but that's basically it. And you
Well, and
know, it's a weird
they
alien
were able
look.
to do a little bit more emoting in Legend of the Sea Devils. Yeah, just because they have things like CGI available now, and actually even more technology with masks where they can make adjustments and things. But yeah, iconic look.
Hmm. Yeah, the interesting thing to me about Doctor Who and the Sea Devils versus Doctor Who and the Silurians is by this point we've much more established what like an iconic third Doctor episode looks like.
Yeah,
So it's much more character based around the trio of the Doctor, Joe Grant, and the Master. Whereas in the first one, we spent more time with the Silurians, we dug more into their ethics, of the situation and the sort of slowly unrolling inevitable tragedy of the misunderstandings and the escalations. With this one, that does take more of a backseat, which in a way, I'm like, oh, it kind of sucks that like this, the Sea Devils are just like the pawns of the Master, and they're just kind of there to serve that plot function. But it's hard to feel resentful when the Third Doctor and Joe Grant and the Master are such a fun trio, and they're having such a fun romp with breaking and entering, and their little one-liners and the affection they all have for each other and the sword fight.
yeah.
That's like a very fun romp of an episode, but the Silurians are relegated a little bit in it.
Well, and I actually see some usefulness in the Master and using the Sea Devils in this way, in that he's annoyed at the humans. So, and I'm stuck here on Earth. So let's draw on another resource here on Earth that I can partner with who are antagonistic to the humans. I mean,
Yeah.
he's playing both sides against each other quite nicely, as the
Mm-hmm.
Master does.
Yeah. And he does say like he's doing this because the doctor annoyed him. He's
Yeah.
going to destroy the humans. The doctors annoyed him. And hey, here's some sea devils. Let me use it for that.
Yeah.
It makes it more personal, which is very fun. But it does give us less time with the sea devils themselves.
I think another lovely thing about the Sea Devils is England being an island nation. We really get to
Mm,
see that well in this story. You know,
mm,
we start off with the oil derrick and the Sea Devils attacking that. And there are those large oil rigs out in the North Sea like that. We get to see an actual naval base, and those were actual Royal Navy officers appearing in a lot of those scenes. And then a lot of the background soldiers and stuff were real naval officers. You get a lot of shots of the seaside. You've got the, hovercrafts and everything else we get to do, which I'm sure John Pertwee was having fun with. We really got to see. Like, there was a submarine in the story, and by the way, the commander of that submarine was a young Donald Sumter, who would later play Rassilon on the Peter Capaldi era, and had a big role as one of the maesters on Game of Thrones. There's an early role with him where he's got more hair on his head and more on his face. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I do think one thing that I do love about the Sea Devils is that episode is that it takes some of the commentary from the Silurians about ambition and really foregrounds that as well. Because in the Silurians, we do have a bit of that. There's the politicians who are also a source of contention and misinformation and escalation, but it's really very much military versus scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And while that continues in the Sea Devils, the military in the person of Captain Hart and his secretary are much more sympathetic eventually. And it's really that politician who comes in and is very clearly set up to be just this character who's only concerned about his reputation, his ambition, his career. He is immediately a coward when he doesn't have any power. And when he does have a power, he's immediately jingoistic, nuclear bomb them into oblivion type. And that's another thread that I think the writers have done a very skillful job of carrying throughout almost every Silurian story is just the nature of not just greed, not just worry about like England's energy future or England's military future, but personal ambition and the way it plays into these escalating diplomatic incidents.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great story. Speaking of tensions and military and all the rest, let's jump forward to Warriors of the Deep. So we get into the 1980s, and John Nathan Turner's bringing back all the classics in season 20. And so, of course, he wanted to get the Silurians and the Sea Devils back, and he had them cooperating together this time. So a particular enclave of Silurians has awoken, and they have a plan to take advantage of Cold War-like tensions going on 100 years into the future between the two big power blocks of that time period, and basically play the humans off against each other, let them annihilate each other so that the Earth reptiles can reclaim the planet. And in order to help with this goal, they awaken a particular group of sea devils who are basically the Navy SEALs of the Silurian era. So these are not just sea devils, these are well trained sea devil soldiers. So,
Yeah, I didn't get to that one in my rewatch.
mm-hmm.
So it's been a few years since I've watched that one, but I do love how this just perennial theme can be adapted to so many different geopolitical anxieties of each time.
Yep. And, in 1984, when this aired, the nuclear tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States were quite heightened. This is when, it was 1983, the film The Day After came out. Threads, I think, came out shortly thereafter in Britain. So this was very much a part of the zeitgeist of the time. And so Doctor Who is touching on that in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
There were good things and bad things about that story. We mentioned the third eye issues with the Silurians before. I thought the Silurian costumes were good. I mean, the masks were the masks that we'd already had, but they kind of dressed them up in better military uniforms this time. And then there's the Merca. So the Merca is this, sea creature, presumably something along the lines of a mosasaur, plesiosaur relative that they're using to assault the base, but the budget wasn't there to achieve it properly, and it looked like a bad pantomime monster.
Mm-hmm.
it is kind of fun that in Big Finish they've gone on to make the merca quite threatening and scary, but it's kind of laughable in Warriors of the Deep.
Yeah, when you can just do it via sound effects and you've got the budget of everyone's imagination.
Yeah, yeah,
Limitless.
yeah. And of course, this is also during that arc where Turlo is kind of questionable, and so there's a lot of scheming going on. There's scheming amongst the humans because there's the two blocks, but then there's agents embedded and all the rest. You've got the Silurians and the Sea Devils interfering with everything, and you've got Turlo messing about with things for the Black Guardian as well. So there's a lot of tension all around it. So, and the Doctor just trying to hold it all together and keep them from killing each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when Turlo comes on board is really when I feel like that era picks up for me personally. It
Yeah.
just really injects a note of tension and interest into every scene.
All right. Well, that was all we had in the classic era with our favorite Earth reptiles. I'm going to mention something that happened during the gap, during the hiatus. So we had the New Adventures novels. And one of the things the New Adventures novels had established was at some point in the next 1,000 years, the Silurians and Sea Devils did awaken finally in mass and were able to establish a peace with humans and coexist. And part of this is by this point, the Earth had that great Terran empire that stretched across the galaxy that we saw in Frontier in Space. So while we didn't see them in Frontier in Space, there were Silurians and Sea Devils walking the streets. And they, again, were referred to as Earth reptiles at this point in history as well. Out of respect, the Silurian and Sea Devil names were kind of considered apocryphal and somewhat insulting. Earth reptiles, the name that the species went with at that point. And that, I think, is a good segue into our first modern era Silurian and story, Hungry Earth and the Cold Blood, in the Matt Smith era, written by Chris Chibnall.
Yeah, I remember when this first came out, I didn't care for this episode as much, but rewatching it with the classic Who and then this, I was really struck by how beautifully they tied in the thoroughgoing themes and just the details. And I just thought it was a really believable and great continuation of the story. At the time, I think I was just really it's just it can be a really depressing story. Humans
Yeah.
really screw things up, but it's actually much more hopeful than I remembered. We end on that note of like, it didn't work out this time, but most of these people survived, and humanity and Silurians are going to get a chance to try again in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Um, from a narrative viewpoint, it was really interesting to me to see some of the changes that were made for a more modern storytelling sensibility, namely removing it from these kind of larger forces and grounding it more in the nuclear family and really tying that into like what we tend to see as the base of nationalism and jingoism and tribalism of like that family and protecting that nuclear family with the human family and then also the two sisters on the Silurian side, that tied it into a more personal note than I think we saw in the classic Who stories. But at the same time, just thematically, it's still just very continuous, and I thought that was very masterfully done.
Yeah. And I think it was sowing the seeds very well for the Earth reptile arc that we saw in the New Adventures novels too, which was to tie that in that way. I've got mixed feelings about the mask redesign. They obviously went for a more modern mask design that can allow the actors to show more emotion, which was very necessary to the story. But we lost the third eye, and the more reptilian look really comes with when they're wearing their little masks on soldiers when they're out patrolling, so that they look scarier. But it's not really how they look behind the scenes.
Yeah. I thought that was an interesting way to kind of try to bridge the
Yeah.
gap between the costumes of the classic Who Silurians and the new Who
Yeah.
Silurians, where you can be just like, the mask looks a little bit more like the other ones. So it's possible that you can retcon that in your head to those other ones were also wearing masks. It's possible that you can be like, those are two different ethnic groups of Silurians that have those
Yeah.
differences.
Yeah, there was some suggestion in the script that these might even be a separate species or subspecies of Silurians than the ones we saw with the rubber masks.
Yeah, another thing that struck me on this rewatch is like in the first two classic Who episodes, in Pertwee's era, the Doctor tries to be a negotiator between the humans and the Silurians, and this seems like such a natural choice. He's the defender of humanity, but he's not a human. He's got that disinterested, somewhat neutral outside observer stance. It seems like he's somebody that both sides can be willing to trust. But in the end, both of those attempts that he makes to broker peace fail because introducing that extra step of distance um, is something that introduces space for more misunderstandings and miscommunications and missed abilities to speak directly with each other. So the closest we get to actually getting a peace is when the Doctor makes the introductions and then steps back. And Amy Pond and Nazarene Chowdhury are the ones who actually get the closest we've ever seen up to this point to negotiating a peace and negotiating a deal.
And some of that comes down to the modern era's reliance on the companions as a focus point. So he really is handing off to Amy to run things
Mm-hmm.
because he trusts her to do the right thing with the training he's given her. Um, yeah. I do love, again, we have a clear division between the older and younger Silurians here. Um, the Obviously the younger soldier Silurians are much more militant and much more willing to cause havoc and damage rather than try to negotiate, to the point where they're actually interfering with their own people in the negotiations. We have an older leader who is much wiser and more willing to think things through, but still protecting his own people's interests. We have a scientist who initially just saw humans as the same primitive apes they were experimenting on in the Eocene era, supposedly. And yet he is able to come around once he starts realizing, no, they really have evolved and they really are thinking this through, and maybe there's more to them than I gave them credit for. Um, so that was lovely. Those negotiations really did feel like negotiations, like you would have in a political scene.
Yeah, and yet it is interesting that when we actually see the humans and Silurians negotiating, they come up with essentially the same deal that the Doctor proposed to the Silurians before, which is like you'll share the Earth with your advanced civilization. You can live in the parts that humans don't find inhabitable, which like I have thoughts and feelings about that because like Amy rattles off a couple of places. I'm like, Amy, people live there. Like British people don't want to live there, but people live in the Australian outback. Like you can't just give that away. Um, so I think there are definitely some limits on the utility of Silurians as a metaphor in that way, and there's definitely some blind spots that the writers have there. I think there's definitely I could definitely see a future episode where we flash forward to that piece and people are like, hey, how about you displace some white people for the Silurians?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I do want to go off onto a scientific tangent now, because there are some things that have cropped up in all these stories that are inconsistent. So this panel is called Emissaries of the Eocene, and that's because the Silurians in the Hungry Earth and Cold Blood talked about being from the Eocene period of history and experimenting and hunting young early primates and so forth. First of all, the name Silurians, even uh, John Pertwee's doctor mentioned, was an appropriate name for them. The Silurian era of history ran from about 443 to 420 million years ago and adjacent to the Devonian period, which is known as the Age of Fishes. The Silurian period is a period where we had the emergence of vascular plants on land from more primitive land plants. So by vascular, meaning having like a sap system to run things up into branches rather than the more simple type of plants we had like ferns prior to that. There's a diversification of fish at this point where they start to develop jaws. It had been mainly jawless fish prior to this. And the jawless fish start to decline as a result. And trilobites are still around at this period, but we did not have advanced land reptiles at this point. So this definitely is not a period that the Silurians are from. Also, it doesn't make sense for me that the Silurians were around the Eocene unless Some of them had woken up from the Cretaceous for a bit and then went back to sleep again, based on the fact that they had a pet T Rex in the Silurians, based on what we would see with Triceratops and the rest in Dinosaurs on a Spaceship on a Silurian ark. They are clearly from the late Cretaceous. Um, in the Silurians, the whole reason they went into hibernation is because there was this large object going to come and crash into the Earth. And so they went into hibernation to avoid it. And it turned out to be captured and become the Earth's moon. Well, in 1970, that was the leading theory for how the moon came to be. And by the 1980s, that had fallen out of favor. Our general theory now of how the moon formed is that a Mars like object hit the Earth very early in its formation. And a lot of stuff was thrown up into space and then coalesced into the moon. And the Apollo era astronauts measured carbon dated, well, not even carbon dated, it would have been like uranium dated or something, Earth or moon rocks. And they come out at like 4.45 billion years old, which means this is in the early days of the solar system that the moon formed. Little after the Earth formed, but not long after. So it would not make sense for the moon to be what caused them to go into hibernation. And then, of course, there's Kill the Moon that suggests that the moon's an egg, which made no sense at the time either. So that is a problem. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just said, and still doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So we basically have a Silurian dating controversy here that's of magnitudes greater than the unit dating controversy that we're all familiar with from the 1970s. Just to drive a point home too. So again, the Silurian period was about 444 to 419, 420 million years. The Cretaceous ended around 65, 66 million years ago. The Eocene period, which is in the Cenozoic era, ran from about 56 million years to about 33.9 million years ago. There were primates. They were simple primates. They were the ancestors of lemurs and monkeys. They were not even what you would call really an ape yet. So all the Silurians denigrating them as apes and all they've advanced far beyond what you remember them as, folks. So there's where I have some problems with the science falling down. The Silurians and Sea Devils themselves are amazing. Their backstory is a little bit questionable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, as a writer, I have great sympathy for people trying to write a Silurian story nowadays and inheriting not only all of the original science that is now incorrect, but like all of the attempts to fix it
Yeah.
that have equally incorrect and complicated matters. At a certain point with Doctor Who, it's like, well, I can either take joy in nitpicking all the science, or just like, well, I guess that's how it works in this universe.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, let's see. From Hungry Earth, Cold Blood, we jump to Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, which is set on a Silurian ark, but all the Silurians have been killed. But we have many of the pets that they brought along with them. So this was a group that, instead of going into hibernation, went off into space in the hopes of finding a new colony or something to survive. And so they brought along a lot of their fauna with them. So we saw pterosaurs and triceratops, and there have been obviously signs of velociraptor attacks and all the rest of this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is another one that I feel like has improved for me with age. I think that when this first came out, like the name Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, like we were all very hyped for it. And then it turned out to be like, a regular Doctor Who episode and quite fun because a regular Doctor Who episode is quite fun. But coming back to it without the expectations of, oh, dinosaurs on a spaceship, you're like, yeah, no, this is really fun. They do a great job of balancing all of the different characters. It is quite a fun romp. There's quite a bit of fun little side characters and like the petulant robots. The environment is fun. The world building details of the Indian Space Agency are quite fun. And the tension ratchets up nicely. Rory's dad being there, it's quite fun. The Silurians don't show up very much. They're very much there as like the victims, a plot point to make the Doctor. Yeah, they get fridged so that the Doctor can show like his ruthless side towards the enemy.
I do feel like they had too many characters in the story. The whole thing with Cleopatra and the adventurer dude just seemed like too many. Adding Brian was fantastic, and giving him that fish out of water story in there, and that time to bond with Rory, and that was fantastic. I really feel like that was a great addition. I feel like in an hour-long story to have five companions is a bit much.
I could have done without Riddell. I thought Nefertiti was kind of a fun foil
Like
for
Nefertiti.
Amy. Um,
Yeah.
and kind of bounce like Amy, kind of like trying to impress her. Um, Riddell didn't super distinguish himself for me. Um, but overall, I thought they did a pretty good job of balancing. I think the fact that with this one, the fact that they fridge the Silurians, on one hand, it's very emotionally affecting. And I do love seeing the ways that civilizations affect others even after they're gone. I think that's an excellent way to do world building, to be like, yeah, people die or they move away or things change, but the effects they've had on their environment still ripple out. This arc is still affecting other people's lives and being fought over in this economic tug of war, and also being seen as a threat to Earth. But I do think it also kind of highlights one of the things that I think is the downfall of the Silurian stories, which is, the first one was just such a beautiful slow motion tragedy, really wrestling with the ethics of the situation. But a lot of the stories that follow that seem to feel like that is the foregone conclusion, that all of the stories have to go. It always has to end in a tragedy. These two species can't get along. Occasionally we get bright spots like, yes, they're sharing the earth now, but it's mostly that. And I think the Silurian stories, they're a commentary on a lot of things. I think they're also a commentary on the anxieties of colonizers and colonialism, and like, we took this place, but other people were here originally. And I think the downfall with that of the Silurians is that they were asleep. Like, they made the conscious choice to go to sleep or escape to space. And so the colonizers can honestly say, we had no idea you were here. And so that metaphor doesn't land because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interestingly, there could have been another species that did the same thing to humans in that arc in space run in the Tom
Mm.
Baker era, and that didn't happen. It could have been interesting to have had some species that survived the solar flare cataclysm that came to the fore, and then when the Nerva beacon woke up, the humans are trying to come back with like, "Hey, wait, this is our planet. What are you doing here?" Um,
Ooh, I love that.
no.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been great. Future Doctor Who writers, take note. That storyline hasn't been done yet.
All right. Well, and one thing I do like about Dinosaurs in the Spaceship and the Next Story is it does flesh out the Silurian story a little bit without necessarily having them directly involved in the story. And that next story is the Crimson Horror, which involves a creature from the Cretaceous. And I do believe it is mentioned to be from the Cretaceous in this story correctly. That was a problem for the Silurians and was spreading a plague amongst Silurians.
Mhm.
That's Mr. Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to backtrack for a moment, since that's a Madame Vastra story,
Oh, yeah.
like, her early episodes don't have a lot of commentary on like Silurians as a whole, as a species, but Madame Vastra has to be one of the best characters that New Who has brought us. Her and Jenny and Strax are just so fun. They have a wonderful dynamic. Um, I really recommend checking out the Paternoster Gang Big Finishes if you're not already listening to them. First of all, they're like the funniest Big Finish that's being put out. But second of all, they're just also really moving. The romance is beautiful. And I feel like with Vastra usually being the lone Silurian in those, we do get a lot of interesting commentary on the nature of being outcast, particularly in such a strict society as Victorian London. So we see a lot of parallels with being a Silurian, with being gay, with being disabled, with lots of other things. So I think Madame Vastra was a genius choice, genius creation of the character. I remember when A Good Man Goes to War came out, and all of us were like, oh my God, because queer rep was like so rare at that point. And it was just so joyous of everyone being like, oh my God, Madame Vastra and her maid. Did you see that joke with the tongue? And it was it was just like a really exciting, joyous time. So I'm so glad that Silurians brought us Madame Vastra and then the
Sure.
Crimson Horror.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, just to follow up on Madame Vastra, so clearly she is a Silurian that woke up at another time period in the 19th century, and the Doctor had some dealings with, and he was able to find her a place in the society rather than going back into hibernation or causing more trouble for society. And she ends up being Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's inspiration. How awesome is that? Um, and yeah, and I will say for those that do listen to Big Finish, there's another spin-off series I'm quite fond of at Big Finish called Jago and Lightfoot, where two of the amazing Robert Holmes side characters from Talons of Wayne Chiang have their entire own series. And they are in a similar time period to Madame Vastra and the Paternoster Gang, and they do have some crossovers before the end, where it's mainly Strax interacting with them. But yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so Crimson Horror, lovely, creepy horror story that has a tie to the Silurians. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Sweet is very great, very creepy. Love Diana Rigg in that. Love the character of Ada. Wish she had come back in future Paternoster Row things. I think she would have been a great addition to the Paternoster gang. But yeah, another fun romp, mostly character based, but with some great world building elements that flesh out the Silurian world.
I also just remembered something from Hungry Earth, Cold Blood because of this story. So, you know, I mentioned in the Silurians that they were not against using biological warfare against the humans. And in Crimson Horror, we see a biological agent that was a problem for the Silurians. Let's think back to when Hungry Blood and Cold Earth, or Hungry Earth and Cold Blood was set. It was set in 2020.
Yeah, I saw that come up on screen and I was like, oh, that hits different.
So instead of coming from bats at a marketplace in China, what if COVID was accidentally released when the Silurians woke up? If it was part of the militant, maybe the last little bomb that they threw in before they went back to sleep.
hmm Yeah. Oof, for me personally, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can handle Doctor Who tackling a COVID storyline
Yeah,
because I'm like, I know they could just say it's a fixed point in history and he can't do anything about it. But I'm like, he's done so much for us. He couldn't have saved us from that. But
beautifully, Big Finish has covered the COVID era with Paul McGann's Doctor, and it's been done well.
mm,
So
yeah, I don't know when I'll have the more emotional fortitude to tackle that. But as we'll talk
certainly,
about in the Surviving the Next Hiatus panel, thankfully there's a lot of other Doctor Who to tackle until I do.
sure. Before we go on to our next story, I am going to mention another science thing that bugs me. And it started with Hungry Earth, Cold Blood, where they started referring to the Silurians as Homo reptilia. Okay, and folks, by the way, neither of us has seen the war between the land and the sea yet. It has not aired in the United States yet. But the one minor spoiler I'm going to drop, which has been in all the press stuff for it, is that they're referring to the Sea Devils as Homo aqua. Homo is a genus or whatever, just above species for a certain type of primates. Homo sapiens is human. We had Homo habilis, Homo erectus. These were other primitive humans like us. Calling them Homo reptilia or Homo aqua suggests they are more closely genetically related to us than they are to the dinosaurs. And that is not the case. It's a cute little affectation they're doing to suggest, well, see, they're a sentient species and blah, blah. Yeah, that's not why they're called that. So it really is inappropriate to call them Homo reptilia and Homo aqua. That first word Homo would be something very different. So probably something related, honestly, to something like Velociraptor or Oviraptor or one of those species that were heading toward a little more intelligence toward the end of Cretaceous.
Yeah, the Silurians, Eocenes, Earth reptiles, etc., just have had a problem with names from the
Yeah,
very beginning, as you noted earlier, and it does not seem to be getting better.
no, no,
It's yeah,
no.
yeah. You mentioned John Pertwee's doctor correcting himself on the first one, and I just think that is so funny when he does that in the Sea Devils. Like the person who discovered them, and like you, the doctor,
Yeah, yeah,
you saved them, but trying to save face there.
yeah. 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 Um, yeah. All right. So then our next canonical story was Legends of the Sea Devil, Legend of
Mhm.
the Sea Devils, where we had sea devils awake in it was the 18th century, I think, at this point in the pirate era,
Yeah.
running a pirate ship around, and I thought they
Mhm.
were very well executed there.
Yeah, yeah, we mentioned earlier they kept the look very similar, just touching up a little bit with the advantage of CGI now. And I think they did very well. I think the upgrades to the costumes also looked very nice. They still kind of look like the same vibe, the same culture could have produced these as those blue robes from Sea Devils, but much more realistic, much better fitting, not looking quite as ridiculous when wading up through the ocean.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I thought, I mean, I think this was a lovely episode. I thought they did a great job of incorporating historical figures, loved the take on one of my favorite female pirate captains. Um, the yearning between 13 and Yaz was very lovely, though obviously they should have kissed at the end. Like, come on, give us one. Um, and just a lot of really fun one-liners, really interesting development. A much more militant Sea Devil than we saw in the original, not as conflicted as in the original Doctor Who and the Sea Devils. So a little bit more threatening, not quite getting into ethics of things in favor of again the more romp style, but a
Hon-
fun episode.
Honestly, threatening in the way that the Sea Devil should have been in Warriors of the Deep, because
Mm-hmm.
that was supposed to be like a Navy SEAL type team. These guys were more like swashbuckling soldiers here. This was cool.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
particularly
it,
the leader, he was a strong leader.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, he was intense, like an actually threatening sea beast. That was great, very scary.
Yes, yes, we upgraded from a Merca to a full-on Kraken.
The
That's great.
Boston. Yeah,
Yeah.
great aesthetics. Loved them taking over the pirate ship and attaching their own little propulsion system to it. And that's another theme that I think has been really well brought out throughout each of the Silurian episodes is that they very much are about striking fear into the hearts of the apes. That
Mhm.
is always one of their tactics. Um, even, like they say, like, they don't need ships. They are an aquatic species, but having a big ship that flies through the air with glowing green lights scares the apes. And yeah, whether it's in the big finishes where they have like that whatchamacallit, that injection that makes people revert to like caveman fear in the very beginning when they have that psychic beam that makes people start drawing caveman pictures on the walls and
Mhm.
regress to an earlier evolutionary stage. Sure, that's scientific gobbledygook, but that is like very interesting that so much of their tactics is about reducing humanity to a lower state through fear.
Through primal fear, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that is fantastic. And there may be a reason for it. So we know there are more than one site where there are Silurians or sea devils in hibernation. We know from Cold Blood, Hungry Earth that there could be at least several hundred in one location. But maybe the entirety of the frozen sea devils and Silurians only amounts to several thousand,
Mm-hmm.
barely enough to keep genetic diversity in the population. Even if it's tens of thousands, it's nothing compared to the 7 billion humans that are here. So they have to use fear because they could be overwhelmed. They do have higher technology, but they could be overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so fear helps keep them on an even edge footing.
Yeah, and that's the point the doctor makes to them several times is like, you guys are outnumbered. There are billions of humans.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Well, now, of course, our friends in Britain have already seen The War Between the Land and the Sea. Those of us here in the United States, I think it's coming up in February. This is a spin-off of Doctor Who that was developed with Disney Plus that has been delayed as the Disney Plus partnership is kind of disintegrated. But it features a new variation on the Sea Devils coming awake and causing trouble for mankind. And that's as much as I know from the trailers. I'm not getting any deeper into that. So it'd be interesting to see how they've been further developed there, whether it's positive or negative. The early buzz I'm getting is at least the early episodes. You get a very Children of Earth, uh, scary vibe from, which is great. Some people have said that maybe it didn't stick the landing. I guess we'll see when we get to see it. Um,
Yeah, in general, I'm very skeptical of unit spinoff just because I don't feel like New Who interrogates the military as much as Classic Who did. There was always this tension with the third Doctor, of just like he had a certain way of doing things, the Brigadier had a certain way of doing things, and like there were advantages and disadvantages to both. And sometimes we were like, yeah, no, the Doctor's right. Sometimes like, yeah, no, actually, the Brigadier's right. And in New Who, it's more like unit are the cool allies that the Doctor can call in, and I don't see them being interrogated quite as much. So like on a thematic level, I'm skeptical. On a I
well,
will love everything Gemma Redgrave does. I'm excited. So I'm sure I'll watch it and get to see her big sad eyes, and be very pleased about that. And then I'll go la 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 about certain things.
yeah. Well, I will say, you go back and look at the early modern era unit stories in the David Tennant era. I don't think they were
Yeah,
always that
no, those
helpful.
ones did.
They were being run by the military and they were problematic because of it. And the Doctor was often in conflict with how they
Mhm.
were heading. Once
Yeah,
Kate took over, they became more useful allies because the science leads.
yeah. So the thing, not to get too off track, but the thing is,
Mhm.
I don't feel like I see science leading that much.
True,
It's
true.
Kate leads, and the
Yeah.
military backs her up. I feel like if I were to see science leading, we would see things being led with more of a sense of curiosity, more of a sense of exploration, and less defensiveness. So, like, I would love to see a unit series that focuses a little bit more on the scientific mysteries. And hey, Big Finish, hire me. But back to the Silurians.
Well, I guess we can hope that in the war between the land and the sea, maybe Shirley Ann Bingham is playing a bigger role this time in
Yes,
doing the
she is
science.
delightful. As much as I would love to have Osgood back, Shirley and Bing Shirley's a wonderful character. And I do hope we continue to see her as well.
Right. Well, I think we've had a pretty good run of talking through this. I don't know if there's a
Mhm.
lot more to say. Um, any last words on Silurians or Sea Devils you want to add in?
Yeah, I think we've touched on all the major points I wanted to make. Again, I think they're a fascinating species. They've produced some fascinating characters, including one of my favorites of all time, Madame Vastra. I think there's times when the storylines don't stick the landing, but you can say that about any element of any TV show. But I love talking about them with you, and I would love to chat with anybody at the convention. If you see me and you're like, oh, but have you considered this aspect of that Silurian storyline? I'll be there. I'll also be on the Discord. So hit me up and let's chat characters, world building, and plot.
I will say if and when we get more Doctor Who stories, once our little problems get resolved, I would certainly love to see the Silurians and Sea Devils used again. I'd love to see some new interesting take on them, maybe them out in space again, but actually on the ship. I'd love to see what they would work with in a current era. Not just the fear and type things we've done. Maybe something set during the Earth Empire where they're already living cooperatively with humans, but you're at some base on some planet and there just happen to be Silurian or Sea Devil scientists there or something. That would be kind of cool. Um, I think they're great species. I think they could be used more, and I'd certainly like to see them again before sea Daleks again. Honestly. All right. Well, I'm just going to mention some other panels I'm on this weekend. Pre-recorded, I have done one on 50 years of Marslanders. I want to learn a little bit more about the science there. And we're also talking about the anti-prime directive, sometimes when the doctor's interference actually caused problems. And I'll also be talking about how to volunteer at the convention and about one of my new passions, fountain pens. And Gabby, anything else you want to promote?
Yeah, I'll also be on a couple other panels, How to Survive the Next Hiatus, The Power of Community Building through Doctor Who, the panel on spiders and other arachnids in Doctor Who. I think that's it. Oh, and Americans in Doctor Who. Surprisingly difficult to find a list of Doctor Who episodes that comprehensively lists all the Americans in it, but I'll do my best.
Okay. Well, obviously, Planet of Fire is one.
Yeah, yeah. The Perry era and the
Yeah.
gunfighters in a town called Mercy. I'll see what I fit in. But yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thanks, Gabby, and thanks everyone for listening in. You can find me on the Discord as well if you have questions, or you can certainly post them to YouTube and we try to respond to them later. Have a good weekend. Thanks for watching.